Now, what if the leading coefficient is not 1? I have a 4 in this case. I want it with a 1, so I'm going to divide. Well, first of all, I'm going to add a 9 here. So I'm going to have the 4x squared plus 16x, leave yourself some space, is equal to 9. Now, I want the front to be 1, so I'm going to divide everything by 4. So I get that x squared plus 4x, leave some space, is equal to 9 over 4. Okay, so I'm going to just deal with this. Now that my leading coefficient is 1, I'm thinking of the middle term. The half of 4 is 2. Then square it. 2 squared is 4. So I'm going to add a 4 to each side. The left side, when I square that, that's going to be, when I factor it, is x plus 2 all squared. Now here, 9 over 4. 4, I'm going to call that 16 over 4, right? I wanted a common denominator. So that gives me 25 over 4. Now I'm going to do the square root of it. So I get x plus 2 equals. Now the square root of 25 over 4, that is 5 over 2. So that means that x plus 2 is also equal to the negative 5 over 2. Okay, so let me, in this case, I'm going to subtract the 2. But my 2, I want to write it as a fraction. So I'm going to write that as 4 over 2. So 5 over 2 minus 4 over 2, that gives me 1 over 2. Let me subtract the 2, but I'm writing that as a fraction just to have common denominator. And I'm going to end up getting that x is equal to negative 9 over 2. Once again, in this case, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to move the 5 over. So I have 2x squared minus 4x, some space, and this is equal to 5. My leading coefficient is not 1, so I'm going to divide everything by 2, which is that number. So x squared minus 2x is equal to 5 over 2. Now looking at my middle term, the half of negative 2 is negative 1. Square it. Negative 1 times negative 1 is 1. So I'm going to add a 1 to each side, because the left side is going to factor as x minus 1 all squared equals 5 over 2 plus 1. I'm going to write my 1 as a fraction. So that's going to be 7 over 2. I'm going to do the square root on each side. X minus 1 is equal to, now radical 7 over 2. I cannot have radicals at the bottom, so before I do this, let me multiply top and bottom by radical 2. So I have radical 14 over 2. So radical 14 over 2. And then I also have that x minus 1 equals negative radical 14 over 2. Now I'm going to add a 1, but my 1, I'm going to write it as a fraction. So I get x equals 2 plus radical 14 all over 2. I'm going to add my 1, but I'm going to add as a fraction, and I get that x equals 2 minus radical 14 all over 2. Looking at this case, I'm going to move the 21 over, so I have that x squared plus 8x is equal to negative 21. My leading coefficient is a 1, so that's good. Half of 8 is 4, but 4 squared is 16. So I'm going to add a 16 to each side. The left side factors as x plus 4 all squared equals negative 5. I'm going to do the square root on each side. So I get that x plus 4 is equal to I radical 5. And I also get that x plus 4 is equal to negative I radical 5. All right, let me subtract 4 to each side. So x is equal to negative 4 plus I radical 5. Let me subtract the 4. X equals negative 4 minus I radical 5. My example B, let me move my 5 over. So 4p squared plus AP is equal to negative 5. My leading coefficient is not a 1, so divide everything by that number. So p squared plus 2p is equal to negative 5 over 4. As a matter of fact, let me leave some space there. Negative 5 over 4. Now I'm thinking the half of 2, the middle term, the half of 2 is 1. Squared, 1 squared is 1, so I'm going to add a 1 to each side. But when I add it to this other side, I'm going to call it 4 over 4. The left side, all factors as p plus 1, all squared. 4 over 4 minus 5 over 4, that gives me negative 1 over 4. Now when I do the square root, I get that p plus 1 is equal to I over 2, and p plus 1 is equal to negative I over 2. Now let me subtract the 1, but once I write it on the right side, I'm going to write it as a fraction. So I'm going to get that p is equal to negative 2 plus I over 2. And p is equal to negative 2 minus I over 2. On the top, if you notice, I'm going to look at the top. I write the real numbers, the one that have no I, first. Okay, when it is factored, but the right side is not equal to 0, unfactor it. Distribute the x. So I have x squared minus x. Now distribute the 3. I have 3x minus 3, and all this is equal to 2. Combine your like terms. So I have that x squared plus 2x minus 3 is equal to 2. My minus 3, I'm going to move it to the right side as a plus 3. So I have that x squared plus 2x, some space, is equal to 5. Then I'm thinking, okay, the half of 2, because my leading coefficient is 1. Half of 2 is 1. Squared is 1. 1 squared is 1. So I'm going to add a 1 to each side. The left side, that is x plus 1 all squared. The right side, 5 plus 1 gives me 6. Now I'm going to do the square root on each side. So x plus 1 is equal to the square root of 6, and x plus 1 is equal to the negative square root of 6. Let me subtract the 1. They're not like terms, so I cannot combine them. So x equals negative 1 plus the square root of 6, and x equals negative 1 minus the square root of 6.